The U.S. Transportation Safety Board and intelligence agencies investigating the plane crash are suspicious of the captain and questioning his risky decisions and flying skills. Experts agree that going back to the airport was impossible. However, if there is a smaller nearby airport, specifically Theodore, then deciding to land in the Hudson River seems excessive. Plus, if the landing angle is too steep, it could put a lot of pressure on the situation. The surface of the wing can break, causing the whole plane to plunge straight to the bottom of the river. Meanwhile, during the investigation, the NTSB staff conducted simulation tests using the exact same parameters as the Airbus on flight N49 when it lost both engines. They were checking to see if it could successfully return to Laudia Airport. Out of nearly 24 simulated flights at the TUAN Operations Center in France, experienced test pilots managed to complete more than half of them successfully. He came back to Leia and the borough without a scratch, despite facing doubt and scrutiny for 15 months. Along with that, he dealt with lingering psychological stress. In his final hearing, Captain Sully explained that both he and his crew were poorly trained for situations like this, and that the difference between booking a flight and a real-life emergency is that no pilot knows they're about to face a crisis. No one is really trained to handle emergencies like what he went through. Clearly, the investigation is focused on the individual, but they're overlooking the human element. Sully's sharp reasoning earned him everyone's admiration and all doubts faded away. In the end, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board concluded that Captain Sully made the right call in the case of Flight 1549, and he truly deserves to be honored as a hero. Sully's landing is hailed as a legendary water landing. In a historic day for aviation, right after the crash, the Airbus A320 was sent to the museum and would never fly passengers again. On December 1, 2021, President Joe Biden appointed Captain Sun as the U.S. representative to the International Civil Aviation Organization with the rank of ambassador. A year after the incident, we still talk about Captain Sun's incredible skill in successfully landing the plane during the emergency in the skies over New York. But besides that, let's give a big round of applause for the co-pilot, the flight attendants, and the rescue team. If it weren't for their teamwork and unity, we might never have witnessed such a miracle on the river. Music. On April 17, 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 had an engine failure at 32,000 feet, but the talented female captain safely landed the plane at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. Music. Flight 1380 was a scheduled passenger flight to Dallas Love Field in Texas. Operated by the largest low-cost airline in the US, this flight is run on a Boeing 737-700, an 18-year-old plane from the 737 Next Generation series. Like other planes of its kind, it's equipped with two CFM56-7B engines, which are among the safest in the world. At 10:20, the plane finished refueling and the checks for a journey that'll last over 3 hours, covering a distance of 2,300 kilometers, with a total of 149 people on board, including 144 passengers and 5 crew members. The flight crew's captain is Tammy Hoswa, a 56-year-old really unique individual you should pay attention to. She's the first woman to fly an F-18 fighter jet and one of the first female pilots to serve in the US Navy. Tammy has been with Southwest Airlines since 1994 and has a total of 11,715 flight hours, including 10,513 hours on the Boeing 737. The co-pilot is Duran Larella, a 44-year-old former US Air Force pilot who served in the Iraq War. I've been working for the airline since 2008 and have racked up 9,508 flight hours, including 6,927 hours on the Boeing 737. On top of that, there are 3 flight attendants on board. At 10:43 local time, Captain Phi An Dong got the go-ahead to take off from the runway. Music. About 18 minutes into the flight, Flight 1380 was redirected to the center in New York. The captain requested to climb from 30,000 to 38,000 feet, and ATC granted it. At that moment, the plane was flying smoothly and heading toward the main destination, so no one could have predicted what was coming. Just 20 minutes after taking off, a terrifying incident unfolded at 11:03. The plane, climbing to 32,000 feet, had its left engine suddenly explode, catching the entire crew off guard. Metal fragments flew out, hitting the body and tail of the aircraft, shattering a window. The sudden pressure drop between the inside and outside of the plane caused a female passenger sitting in row 14 to be sucked out. Luckily, 2 other passengers managed to grab her legs just in time, but part of her body. The seatbelt was completely out in the open, and that was Jennifer Roden, a 43-year-old bank manager at W. Fago in New Mexico, on her way back home to her family after a work trip. Suddenly, the fire alarm went off, and the plane started to lose pressure. Oxygen masks dropped down from the ceiling, and both passengers quickly grabbed them to breathe, thanks to the explosion. Some parts of the wings started falling off, and the big Boeing was shaking violently, tilting about 40 degrees to the left. Flying the plane had become tougher than ever. With the crew's experience, could they change the current situation? When the alarm blared, the flight crew quickly noticed that the RPM of the left engine and the fuel pressure had dropped to the lowest levels, and the plane was only at 28,000 feet. The captain immediately activated the fire suppression system to shut down the engine while trying to control and regain balance on the wings after the chaos. First, Fire Doan decided to put on his oxygen mask because the oxygen in the cockpit was running low. If this situation continued, everyone on the flight would quickly lose consciousness and could die. The only way to ensure safety now was to get the plane to descend and deploy the emergency masks. The captain tried to contact air traffic control, but she couldn't hear the response clearly. This was partly due to the oxygen masks, but luckily, with some quick thinking. My experience is that Dad noticed the problem, and then she quickly turned the mic back on to make the call. This is New York, frequency 135.43 ATC. This is station 1380. One of the plane's engines caught fire, and we need to land immediately. Which airport do you want to go to? Harrisburg International is the closest airport to you right now. While getting this info from the control tower, the county pilot, Alexa, carefully looked over the options and then suggested to the captain an airport to the southwest, Philadelphia, since it's bigger, and that's a better choice. To the ATC fire response team, can we land in Philadelphia? Of course, your request is approved. Please have the plane descend to 11,000 feet and maintain that altitude. Understood at 11:05. After initially getting control of the situation, the captain is temporarily handing over control to the co-pilot while they start looking for some records and guidelines to manage the plane effectively with only one engine left. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the cockpit is tense and silent, while outside the cabin, the air is incredibly still. Panic broke out from the explosion and the plane's strange movements. Passengers started to think they were gonna die. Some were so scared they burst into tears, while others, calmer, kept praying to God, hoping for help with the flight. Even a guy named Martins live streamed the scene in the cabin on Facebook, as if he were documenting the last moments of his life. Meanwhile, Jennifer Roden was trying to get through the cold moments with him. There was hardly any air to breathe outside, and they discovered that in the middle of the chaos, two flight attendants, along with Christine, a paramedic named Adidon, were trying to keep her alive and pull her back to the cabin. They immediately started emergency CPR on Jennifer, but things didn't look good. One part of her body was too badly injured from the impact and the lack of oxygen. The attendants quietly laid her down in seats 14B and 14C, trying not to let too many passengers know what was going on, because if they found out, they were getting more and more panicked. At 11:10, the plane sent a signal to ATC in Philadelphia. The air traffic controller directed flight S13380 to head west at 250 degrees and allowed the plane to continue descending to approach the runway. The captain made an announcement over the PA system, saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to land in Philadelphia. Please fasten your seatbelts." After hearing that from the captain, the atmosphere in the cabin started to calm down a bit. Everyone was anxious and waiting. By 11:12, the plane was at 8,000 feet. At this altitude, the air is a lot easier to breathe. The captain and co-pilot took off their oxygen masks, and the captain regained control while the co-pilot continued monitoring the aircraft. By 11:14, ATC got back in touch with Flight 1380, saying, "Flight 1380, you're on frequency 128.4, current altitude is 4,000 feet. Do you want to approach the runway?" The response was, "Yes, sir, to ensure safety, I need to control everything before we start our descent." "Alright, continue to maintain an altitude above 2,300 feet until further notice." Next, air traffic control told us that we were just 20 d away from the runway. Runway 27L was ready for us, and at that point, Captain Doan could finally relax. But shortly after, they got a call from the head flight attendant, Fan Hammer, reporting that a passenger had been pulled out of the aircraft. She was brought back into the cabin, but her condition was critical and life-threatening. A few other people were also lightly injured. With this news, the crew was faced with two tough choices. First, ensure a safe long runway landing for the entire flight. Second, speed up the approach and land as quickly as possible to save the passengers. Using her experience and decisiveness, the captain decided to change the original plan. She set the flaps to 5 instead of the usual 15. With this setting, the plane's landing speed increased, allowing it to land on a shorter runway while still ensuring safety. She then immediately informed air traffic control about the flight. "We need medical support at 1380. We've got a flight with a passenger in distress asking for immediate emergency assistance. We've received your request, and we're mobilizing right now. Please don't ignore the right turn or head down the runway. Thank you, but flying an aircraft with a burning engine is incredibly difficult. On top of that, there's a lot of pressure that makes things really stressful." The captain has been trying to stay calm and has been silently praying, and in the end, her efforts have. At exactly 11:20, the Boeing 737 landed safely on the runway after a nerve-wracking flight, and everyone erupted in joy, thanking God for the quick landing of Flight 1380. But for Jennifer Roden, it was a different story. Even though she was rushed to the hospital right after, her injuries were too severe and she was later pronounced dead. Jennifer was the first passenger to lose her life in this flight incident. For over 9 years, many people in the US have expressed their sadness over her passing, especially in New Mexico. Throughout her life, Jennifer made a huge impact through community activities, charity work, and non-profit organizations in the area. The cause of the accident was investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board, the Federal Aviation Administration, Boeing, the airline involved, and the U.S. Transportation Workers Union, along with the aerospace system. After being involved in the investigation for over a year, collecting and analyzing data, on November 19, 2019, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board released its final report on the accident. As previously mentioned, the Boeing 737-700 was equipped with two CFM International CFM56-7B24 engine fans. However, there was a crack at the joint of the left engine's fan blade number 13, which had grown to a depth of 1.23 centimeters before the plane even took off. Unfortunately, it went undetected, and well, you know what happened next. The issue started with a broken propeller during flight, which caused the engine to explode. Debris from the blast hit the fuselage, creating a hole that led to a pressure differential, resulting in the crash. At this point, it's clear that South Australia-based airlines can't escape responsibility. Interestingly, this incident seems to have been anticipated. About 2 months ago, Brad Ochi, the national director of the American Aviation Mechanics Association, sent a letter expressing serious concerns about the maintenance and safety programs it sought. The Airline Association currently has only a few technicians under its payroll, so 75% of the maintenance work is outsourced. This means that the control and operation processes aren't closely monitored. After the flight, passengers expressed their heartfelt thanks to the crew, especially to the female captain. If it weren't for her intelligence and top-notch flying skills, the death toll could have been much higher. She's seen as a hero, almost like an angel sent to save the day. To help passengers escape danger during the accident on May 1, 2018, President Donald Trump welcomed members of Congress and the selected passengers in a ceremony at the Oval Office to thank him for their bravery. Later, Captain Tami Yosin published a book titled Nervous of Steel, where she wanted to convey the message to always have a strong will in every situation and to believe in yourself. At 5:30 a.m., Flight 3U8633 was getting ready for takeoff at Jiangbei International Airport in Chongqing, China. The crew arrived early to prepare for the journey to Gonga International Airport in the Tibet Autonomous Region. Outside the cabin, 6 flight attendants were busy checking safety equipment and welcoming passengers. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the pilots were double-checking the technical parameters and the maintenance list for the plane. Today we have the A319, which is a variant of the Airbus A320. It's a narrow-body passenger jet with 2 mid-range engines, specifically powered by 2 IAE V2500A5 engines. This model is also Airbus's best-selling aircraft. As of now, the A319 has logged over 19,900 flight hours and completed 12,920 takeoff and landing cycles. The captain for this flight is Liu Trung Kian, a 45-year-old former instructor from the Air Force's Aviation College No. 2, who used to fly military aircraft before joining the airline. In March 2013, the Sichuan Civil Aviation Authority issued a high-altitude flight certificate. Since then, he's been working in the aviation industry for 27 years, accumulating 11,400 flight hours, with 9,200 hours on the A319. His county pilot, 29-year-old Deep, has logged a total of 2,801 flight hours, including 1,100 hours on the A39. To ensure safety on high-altitude routes, the Civil Aviation Administration of China has implemented a special two-pilot system when the captain agrees to it. In special cases like high altitude or engine failure, the captain will have to take charge of the remaining duties. This system is mainly used for flights on high altitude routes, new routes, or complex routes. That's why this flight has a second captain, Liu Bang, one of the top pilots from TUAN Airlines. He has a total of 8,700 flight hours, including 6,700 hours on the A319. All procedures for the flight have been completed, and the 119 passengers are ready to go. My journey is filled with fellow Chinese citizens, each coming to Tibet for various reasons, some looking for business opportunities, others to check out the Potala Palace, and some just to meet up with friends. As we took off, I noticed some older folks starting to chant and pray for a safe flight. The weather was nice, and the sunrise lit up the plane as we took off smoothly. If all goes well, we should land in about 2 hours. Flight 8633 is switching to Chengdu Station on frequency 123.7. See you in Sichuan in 15 minutes after takeoff. We're heading into Chengdu's control area and establishing two-way communication with the ground. We're cleared to climb to 9,800 meters. Hi Chengdu, this is 38,633 at 7,200 meters, speed 424 knots, with transponder 2245. Hello 8,633, radar confirms your climb and to maintain 9,800 meters. Meanwhile, the cabin crew is starting to serve breakfast and drinks to the passengers. At the same time, the second officer, Liu Bang, steps out of the cabin, take a break. He'll be in charge of flying the return leg of the journey. The captain and co-pilot are keeping the plane steady, and they're both feeling pretty chill. The co-pilot even undid his shoulder strap to relax a bit. This might just be the biggest mistake of young Trang's life, because in just a few minutes, the county pilot is going to pay for his actions. According to the schedule, the second half of Flight 3U8633 will cross the Western Tibet Plateau, which is the highest and widest plateau around. At an average height of 4,500 meters above sea level, which includes the Himalayas and Mount Everest, the air density is really low and the oxygen is thin. The weather can change quickly, so the requirements for pilots are a lot stricter. Even though the captain has flown over this area more than 100 times, he still stays super cautious. From a distance, the massive mountain ranges started to come into view at about 7,705 seconds in, just as the plane was approaching the edge of the area, when suddenly a strange sound came from somewhere. The captain and the crew. The co-pilot noticed a crack in the windshield on the right side. The crack was deep, so the captain immediately instructed the co-pilot to check the flight documents. Music playing, the captain hadn't faced a situation like this before, but based on his experience, he knew the A319-100 passenger plane had a 3-layer windshield, an outer layer, a middle layer, and an inner layer. According to the procedure, the pilot needed to use a pen or his finger to confirm the crack. Check if there's a deep crack inside. Use your fingers to feel the crack. As expected, this is a serious issue, which means the airplane's load-bearing capacity is gonna drop a lot. Without panicking, the captain calmly set up a call to air traffic control. This is Sichuan 8633. We've encountered a problem and need to descend to 8,400 meters. Do you want to return to Chongqing? The plane's windshield was damaged. We're coming in for a landing at Chengdu Airport 8633. First, let's lower the plane to 8,400 feet and turn right to head towards Chengdu. But before we could react, right at 7:07 and 45 seconds, there was a loud bang. The impact shattered the windshield, sending glass flying and hitting the engine. To make matters worse, there was a massive pressure difference between the cockpit and the cabin, which sucked the co-pilot out. Luckily, he was still buckled in, so only his upper body was outside. The plane is flying high in the sky right now at a speed of about 431 knots, which is around 800 kilometers per hour, at nearly 10,000 meters. The pressure drop is happening fast, and a strong wind is blasting icy cold air into the cockpit. The captain can't let go of the controls. He tries to pull the co-pilot back with one hand, but he can't fight against the intense force outside. The co-pilot is dealing with freezing temperatures of -40 degrees, and his face is contorted in pain as sharp, stabbing sensations keep hitting him. Inside the cabin, passengers could feel the plane shaking violently, with luggage and belongings flying around. In this emergency situation, the flight attendants were trying to regain control and shouting at everyone to fasten their seatbelts. The oxygen masks dropped down automatically. The head flight attendant and the co-pilot outside were trying to contact the cockpit, but they couldn't get through. At that point, they still had no idea what was really happening. The sudden changes had thrown most of the equipment into chaos. On the plane, there was a malfunction and the notifications kept flashing on the screen. The autopilot got disconnected, and that's when the Airbus started to act strangely. It first turned right, then left, and suddenly nosedived at a steep angle of over 50 degrees. The altitude dropped around 3,000 meters per minute, and the captain saw sharp mountain peaks appearing like a chaotic puzzle. Meanwhile, the plane's throttle opened up, heading straight towards them in an incredibly tense moment. The captain thought everything was about to end, but then he suddenly remembered the promise he made to his little girl back home. He realized that in his hands, he wasn't just holding the lives of 1 or 2 people, but over 100 lives, all focused and using every skill they had. He gripped the controls tighter, and that's when the first glimmers of hope began to spark. The nose of the plane started to lift higher, and for a brief moment, it had broken free from the towering mountains. As soon as the captain started to relax, he noticed the little oxygen he had left was suffocating him. He tried to grab the oxygen mask, but unfortunately, it was on his left side, where his hand was tightly gripping the controls and he couldn't let go. Meanwhile, his right hand couldn't reach it. In a life and death moment like this, all his training from the early years of flying in the military proved to be incredibly important. The weather conditions were brutal, low temperatures, strong winds, and the need for manual flying to get the plane to safety. All these factors, combined with strict training and discipline, shaped Liu King into someone calm and incredibly determined. Even without knowing which equipment was faulty or which was fine, the captain didn't hesitate to pull the left lever, quickly leveling the plane's speed while reducing the throttle. Just seconds later, the aircraft was back in normal and stable flight. The altitude started to drop gradually right after the plane began descending, and the pressure difference in the cockpit also decreased. That's when the crazy stuff started happening. Strong gusts of wind from outside unexpectedly blew into the cockpit, causing the co-pilot to quickly return to his seat. He buckled up, but his right eye was swollen, and he had cuts all over his arms and legs. Despite the pain, the county pilot immediately followed the captain's orders and dialed 7700, which is the emergency code. "Fi, the county pilot don't," said the transponder on the aircraft, and once he entered the identification code, it turned red on the radar screen at the air traffic control center. It was 7:10 and 39 seconds when the setup was complete, and only then did the co-pilot put on his oxygen mask. The air traffic controllers still had no idea what was going on with Flight 2ZUYAN 8633. They didn't realize the flight was in real danger until they received the 7700 emergency code. The control tower tried to make contact again but got no response, despite numerous efforts from neighboring flights. "There's no point in it, Sichuan 8633. If you hear this, respond in the cabin. Things are looking pretty grim, passengers are still struggling against the fierce storm." Flight attendant Chu Yan was suddenly thrown into the air by an unseen force and fell to the ground. Flight attendant Yang Ding was instantly flung out of row 13. Chaos is all you can say when you look into the cabin right now. Some people are screaming and crying while others are filming the disaster on their phones. Meanwhile, the person causing the scene demanded to be let off the plane immediately. The head flight attendant grabbed the mic and shouted, "Please trust us. We're professionally trained, and I assure you, the captain will land us safely." Other flight attendants also came over to comfort and encourage the passengers. The atmosphere quickly calmed down, and everyone silently collected themselves and waited. Up front, the head flight attendant, Mr. Luong Bang, moved from the front row. In the cockpit, you can see the co-pilot is injured and the captain is fighting without an oxygen mask. However, because the wind is so strong, the crew can't communicate verbally and have to use hand signals. He signals to the captain that the cabin is still okay and puts an oxygen mask on him. Then he quickly goes back to his position, checks the flight charts, and suggests to the captain that the nearest airport is Song Lu in Chengdu at 7 hours 14 minutes and 25 seconds. There's no control tower. Liu got the info from the display and error control system of the plane, and right away, the flight plan for 8633 was switched to a direct runway to Chengdu. At that moment, the plane's altitude was recorded at 7,200 meters, pretty close to the minimum required height of 6,700 meters while flying over the mountains. But to make sure there was enough oxygen for everyone on board, the captain had to keep descending, even though that was a pretty risky call. Captain Luong Bang, based on the flight data analysis, advised Captain Liu about the situation. "We're descending at 150 meters per minute, aiming to stop at 6,700 meters. As the Airbus drops to 6,800 meters, it successfully navigates through one of the most dangerous highland areas in the world. The airport is just about 60 miles away. The captain points the nose of the plane towards the runway, and after another 3 minutes of flying, Captain Luong Bang announces they're now about 34 miles from the airport, currently at a height of 6,300 meters and continuing to drop. At 7:19, Luong Bang makes 2 emergency calls to the ground control in Chengdu. Mayday, Mayday, this is 8,633. Cabin pressure is dropping. ATC, we can hear you, but there's too much noise and interference, so we can't get the responses back right away. As soon as we got the info, ground control ordered 6 nearby planes to give way to 8,633 and called for the ground rescue teams to be on standby for emergency assistance. 8 planes outside the runway have halted their takeoff, and 15 planes on the tarmac are also holding back from pushing out. Fire and airport medical staff have also mobilized ambulances and emergency vehicles, all ready for the emergency landing of Flight 8633. Right now, Flight 8633 is only about 28 miles away, with an altitude recorded at 5,700 meters, then dropping to 3,200 meters, and then 2,500 meters. The airport is getting really close to Flight 3U8633, and the wing flaps are set to position 1. However, the challenge isn't over yet. The next issue for the flight crew is figuring out how to safely land the Airbus. There's a backlog because we're running low on fuel, and the standards for approaching aircraft are super strict. To ensure safety, commercial flights typically use the landing system based on their aircraft specs at the Twin Runway Airport, which has runways 02L and 02R. However, runway 02L can't be used for landing due to some technical issues, and the ground crew isn't even sure which runway Flight 8633 will land on. They've just issued the "Prepare for Runway 02R" command. Even though Captain Doan knew that he couldn't hear this information, by 7:28 the runway had been cleared, and the pilots saw the ground really close. At that point, the cabin crew felt pretty confident. They instructed the passengers to take off their oxygen masks and get into a ready position for landing. Captain Luong Bang continued to make a call to ATC to report a left turn and confirm they were landing on 02R. The ground staff breathed a sigh of relief because it turned out that over a week earlier, Captain Luong had been consistently. The flight from Trung Khan to Chengdu was familiar to him, so he knew exactly how the airport runways work. The plane started its landing at a speed of 296 km per hour, and to slow down quickly, Captain Lu Rong reversed the thrust. However, the plane was still not slowing down. The runway 02R at the airport is 3,600 meters long, and if it didn't stop in time, the plane would overshoot the runway in just a few seconds. Fortunately, the braking system wasn't completely broken, even though the automatic brakes had failed. Things went south as soon as the autopilot cut out, and the 3 pilots had to pull the controls together, causing some serious friction. The tires blew out, and the plane started to slow down. After a tense few moments, at 7:42, the plane touched down safely at the intersection of runway E8 and 02R at the Jewel Airport. Passengers were emotional and broke into applause. A message came from the cockpit from the captain: "Hello everyone, I'm Captain Lu Trong-kian of today's flight. We couldn't get you to your destination. On behalf of the flight crew and the airline, I want to sincerely apologize to everyone. Thank you for choosing Flight 3863. After that, the passengers and crew members started disembarking in an organized manner arranged by Sichuan Airlines. Many passengers opted to switch to a different flight and arrived at around 2 p.m. Another 27 passengers were taken to the hospital due to breathing difficulties and emotional distress, but all of them were discharged 2 days later. The co-pilot from the flight has been identified. He only suffered minor injuries, and after treatment, he was discharged from the hospital on May 21st. From the moment the windshield shattered to the safe landing, the life and death situation of Flight 8633 lasted a total of 35 minutes under extreme conditions, like the windshield falling off, huge pressure differences, strong winds, low temperatures, lack of oxygen, and loud noise. The flight managed to land safely with just 2 people lightly injured. This is considered an unprecedented miracle in the history of Chinese aviation. The flight number for Sichuan Airlines 3U8633 is still in use today. The Civil Aviation Administration of China and Sichuan Airlines investigated the incident together, and the final report was released on June 0, 2020. The cause of the incident was determined to be a faulty seal on the right windshield, which allowed moisture to seep in and accumulate in the lower edge of the windshield. This reduced the insulation of the wiring in the windshield heating system. After being soaked in water for a long time, there was a continuous arc discharge in the bottom left corner of the windshield, causing the 2-layer structure of the glass to break down. As a result, the windshield couldn't handle the pressure difference between the inside and outside of the cockpit, and it popped out of the aircraft. All responsibility is believed to lie with the design and manufacturing of the aircraft by Airbus. On June 8, 2018, the Civil Aviation Administration of China and Sichuan Province held a commendation event. Awards were given to the individual team members who successfully handled the dangerous situation on Flight 38633. The flight crew has been honored with the title of Heroic Civil Aviation Crew of China. Captain Liu Changzhon has been named Heroic Civil Aviation Captain and is now classified as a model citizen at the provincial level. Additionally, Captain Liu received a monetary award of 5 million yuan, which is over 16 billion Vietnamese dongs. The second captain, Liu Bang, also received recognition. A reward of 2 million yuan was given to the deputy captain, and the remaining 6 crew members received 1 million yuan each for their contributions on September 30, 2018. President Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, welcomed these brave heroes at the celebration for the 69th National Day as a show of appreciation.